we are really excited to share yet another conversation with you all that we got to have with Leah Goodridge. And for those of you who have been with us since the start, Leah Goodridge was actually our very first interview in Building Belonging way back in season 1. So you may recognize the name. But for those of you who did not catch that episode, our most listened to episode, by the way, of Building Belonging, Leah Goodridge is a nationally recognized attorney, writer. She's published in the New York Times, Time Magazine, so many more. And the reason why we spoke to her the first time around was because of her groundbreaking article, Professionalism as a Racial Construct. Today, in the episode you're going to hear, we're actually talking about Leah's legal practice and what she learned being a housing attorney in New York City about housing and about affordability. And I really hope people enjoy this conversation as much as we did having it. I will say that I learned quite a bit from Leah just having the conversation, and what we talk about, the affordability crisis, homelessness, poverty, the power legal profession has, all of these things. I think the conversation is particularly important and special because of our lived experiences. Yes, we're lawyers. Yes, we have tons of accolades and expertise that we bring to the table. But I really want to highlight that so much of the value that we're bringing to this conversation is because we've lived on the other side of these policies. I have to believe that, if I have this opportunity to have this platform at this moment of time when these stories are most needed, this is why we're here. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're sharing our perspectives. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. There's a lot more to come. Welcome back to Building Belonging. Let's get started.
Welcome to Building Belonging, a podcast of the New York City Bar Association and its Office for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar.
So we had originally come to speak to you on our podcast, Building Belonging, when your article first came out. And by the way, that episode, I believe, is still the most listened to episode of our podcast ever.
Gosh, wow. It's so interesting. I think my life lesson I've learned, because being a lawyer and also being a Black woman and then being from a family that's very when you're in certain settings, you put your head down, you do your work. I've been trained to constantly be very cognizant of how I'm coming off and not be too loud and take up too much space. And I think that essay taught me that no, actually authenticity is what brings it, and authenticity is what will bring people in. Because that essay, I sort of just wrote it with the thinking that no one was going to really read it other than in the small legal academy anyway. And I really genuinely think that's why it's resonated with so many people.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think I've had similar realizations, especially in some of these spaces, as these very elite spaces where the professionalism is strangling you. You're kind of taught to not make people uncomfortable with your reality. And I had a very similar experience in that the more authentic I was in the firm, for instance, the more success I had actually. Pulling that layer away actually helped me, even though it was scary and hard.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, there were people who definitely did not like it. But it does, people respond to that because we need it. We miss it. We all feel kind of out of sorts in these spaces, especially if we have similar backgrounds to us where you are not used to being in this. Can you tell people what you're working on and what you're doing? Because it's been a while.
I know. So for people who might not know, so I wrote this essay, the essay that we're talking about, I wrote a law review article in UCLA Law Review called Professionalism as a Racial Construct. And I think sometimes when people hear it, they're like, oh, so you're trying to say that it's racist to be professional? And they boil it down. And that's no. What I argued is that professionalism itself, the concept of professionalism, is often weaponized against people of color and marginalized groups because not everyone is expected to be professional. And oftentimes, if you're not in line, then people will drudge up the professionalism card and go, oh, hey, you're not Just imagine, for example, if President Obama did any of the stuff,
Any of
any
this.
of this stuff right now, I mean, he would have been laughed off as unserious, unprofessional, not civil, not even worthy of having the president title, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I mean when I say there are different standards of professionalism, and it does not apply to everyone. So I
Yeah.
wrote that essay, it took off, and it was really funny because what we're going to talk about today is housing. And I was a little bit like, wow, I've been doing housing at that point for like 10 years. And this like essay took off more than my housing work has. But I'm here today to talk about housing. And by the way, I wrote that article from my perception as a housing attorney for many years. And one of the experiences I talked about was what it's like being in housing court as a Black woman. Let me just give you guys a picture of housing court. There is one housing court in every borough of New York City. And if you walk in housing court and you stretch your arms out, like both arms, you're going to touch someone. You can't do
Mhm.
crowded all of the housing carts all are. And I think it's emblematic or symbolic of just how severe we are in this housing crisis. So, one of the things that really struck me was that the majority of these people in all boroughs were people of color who were facing,
Mhm.
right? New York is very diverse, but the people who were getting evicted, they were overwhelmingly people of color. And so I kind of began to question, like, okay, I work in these nonprofits. I'd worked in 3 different legal service nonprofits. Why is it not common for us to raise this very elephant in the room, which is that our work itself is racial justice? We are literally representing overwhelmingly people of color, and we're not raising it in our motions. We're not talking about it in the office. And all of that came to the forefront at George Floyd. I think there's one myth that the change in in these workplaces in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd only happened in the corporate space, and that's a lie. You would be so surprised at how many social justice nonprofits were operating the same as your average Fortune 500 company and not talking about these issues. They were not the most inclusive places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, I think it makes sense that your article came when it did because all of this was under the microscope, right? Like in all these spaces and in different ways. And like now, it's not leadership leading the charge on these conversations. Like
Mhm.
the people have always cared about these issues and have always fought for these issues
Right,
at any space you're in.
right,
And so it's interesting to me that you had to deal with that aspect of doing your job, because to your point, you were at when you wrote this article, a housing attorney. But in order to do your job effectively, you had to say all the quiet parts out loud because we have built a system where we have normalized it so much that we don't even talk about it anymore.
right. Like, I remember I'll give you, one example. I was practicing as a housing attorney, and it was very common when you were in housing court to hear a lot of racially coded, "Oh,
Mhm.
clients on Section 8, ha ha," when your client's standing right there. And as the lawyer, especially as a Black lawyer, and if my client is Black or Latino or another person of color, but any race really, I
Yeah.
think the first thing I'm thinking of is, I know of course I can like tell this person off. I'm not a shy person, but I don't want to look unprofessional by
Right.
getting into a tit for tat. And I also specifically don't want my client to think that I'm unprofessional because let me tell you, regardless of the race of your client, if you're a person of color, the people are like, oh, even if your client's Black, sometimes "Oh, I got a Black lawyer. I hope they do a good job." Like the same with doctors, like people
Yeah.
can be very biased. So all of that to say, I wouldn't say anything in these moments because I would think I don't want my client to think that I'm ghetto, ratchet, unprofessional, whatever it is, right?
Right.
So one day I really started just challenging that. And one day I just went on the attorney, on the landlord's attorney. And I thought to myself, I thought, oh Lord, my client is going to want to dump me because my client was standing right there. They said they made a quip about Section 8 and my client being on Section 8. And I said, "Oh boy, my client probably thinks I'm like, well, I came to court and I got Real Housewives. What is" and winning the client afterwards was like, "Wow, Miss Goodridge, yeah, you
Yeah, that's my lawyer. That's my lawyer right there.
my lawyer. So I was like, oh. And I think that's when it really clicked for me that
Right.
like my ideas, especially being a lawyer, because the other thing is like, apart from even just the racial aspect, just as a lawyer, they train us to be devoid of emotions. Yeah. All of our training is supposed to be analytical and we're supposed to be devoid of emotions, right? And so I think in that moment, it really shattered my belief system about what it was to be a fighter and to be a lawyer.
Yes. Leah, and you named it so well because I do agree with you. I think that if you go to law school, part of the training is to make you think that you're not supposed to have emotions. Is to make you think that doing that, trying to like separate yourself from your emotions makes you more quote unquote objective. When
Right.
the reality is it's impossible to separate yourself from your emotions. I think we learn how to suppress them and
Right.
we learn how to create narratives around them so that it feels like we're not using them. But the reality is, we're setting ourselves up to fail in doing that because we all have emotions. You don't have control over your emotions. It is a bodily function, it is a nervous system and hormonal function. And
Right.
it would be better and more effective to learn how to work with your emotions, understand them, interpret them, understand why you're triggered, why you're feeling what you're feeling, so that you can better make decisions with a wise mind, right? And so this piece of it to me is all part and parcel of master narrative, white supremacy, patriarchy, all the things. So you can be disembodied. So you cannot feel connected to your what's really happening. It's really easy to be numb to injustice if you're not allowed to feel.
Right. 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 So all of that to say, I had these I started questioning how I'm showing up in the workplace and
Yeah.
how I am showing up as a lawyer in the professional space. And so around that time, I joined the City Planning Commission as a commissioner. The New York City Planning Commission, it's a body, it has 13 commissioners, including the chair of the City Planning Commission. And we vote on all things land use. Most of our proposals are housing. So an idea of what we see is like, and this is a typical proposal, a 200 unit, a developer wants to build a 200 unit building and 25% of it will include affordable housing. Here are the details. Will you approve this or will you not? That is the City Planning Commission in a nutshell. And when I joined, this is a very big government appointment. And I was appointed by Jamani Williams. It's a whole process. We have to go through the city council. Even sometimes, the one, believe it or not, there was another appointee before me, I should say another nominee before me. It was actually Sia Weaver, who's now Mamdani's tenant advocate.
Mhm.
And speaking of this whole concept of how we show up, at that time, hers didn't go through because they were like, oh, they rammed her in the press and they were like, oh, she's too, what was it? She went too hard. She's too much of a, she's a socialist. She's a tenant
My
advocate.
God.
She's an extremist. She's a radical. So yeah, so this government position, meanwhile, if you're like a developer, right? If you like have all kinds of ties to being a developer, you have conflicts of interest, that's not, oh, whatever, but like let you be like a tenant advocate and you're pegged as like a radical, whatever. So
Yeah,
all
how tenant advocate a dirty word.
I know. They were like, "Oh my god." And so that's to say, like, these appointments at the time when I got on, this was when I'd been a housing attorney, but I hadn't written professionalism as a racial construct yet. And I don't know if I was like, I don't know. What would I say? I wasn't like ruffling feathers in a widespread way. You know what I mean? So I think my profile at that time was just, oh, she's a lawyer. So this is someone who's going to come to the meetings and that's it. Oh, there you go.
Wolf in sheep's clothing. Wolf in sheep's clothing.
When I got on, by that time, I had really been thinking about how I show up. And by the commission, honey, it was different. It
I
was,
love this.
I am done. I'm speaking up. Not that I wasn't speaking up before, because I've always been anyone who's worked with me in any workplace will tell you I speak up often, right? But, when you're at these meetings, they're recorded, they're public record, they're on YouTube, and they're in the press. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of like, what do I say? And I didn't care at that time. And then I also had joined social media around that time. This was like 2022. And I decided to bring the work to talk about it openly on social media. I had a lot of critics, and the critics were landlords and developers. And I just didn't care at that point because I
Right.
was just like, no, I'm not going to do this whole shrink myself or not say what's going on and do the whole like just put my head down and go to meetings and no one has to know what's happening. No. And so here we are.
And here we are. Good for you, Leah. It has been such an honor and privilege to watch you bloom, girl. Like, I love your content.
You
I
know,
love your housing content.
yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I joined Instagram. I really started really using it, maybe like really using it like a couple of months ago. And it kind of blew up unexpectedly because I'd been using Twitter before that.
Right.
But what I do is I post the housing lottery. I post the Mitchellamism. Those are the affordable housing co-ops. Because listen, this is the other thing, right? Sometimes people think, oh, you're a tenant advocate, so you're not about being a homeowner. I'm like, where did you get that from?
Grow up. Oh,
I mean, just make up their own thing up in their head. I've got this a number of times. I'm like, what are you talking about? I want city council members to go and pass laws to make it easier for New Yorkers to buy homes because first of
yeah.
all, a good chunk of the home buyers are cash buyers and a good chunk of those are corporations. But anyway, that's a whole different story. I'm a big advocate for home ownership. I grew up in a Mitchellama, so that's why I post about them.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, I grew up in Brownsville, and and this is why when I got older, I was like, I was looking for apartments. I was like, "Oh, where's the laundry?" And they were like, "Outside." I was like, "What are you talking about?"
You're like, you better stop.
What, what are you talking about? Because in the Mitchell Islands, you have everything there. So I was like, "What?" So yeah, my Mitchell Island, I mean, yeah, I was Brownsville, so you still had the gunshots outside. It's celebrating Brownsville celebrates New Year's with gunshots now.
There you go. There you go.
And right at midnight. But all that to say, I'm a big advocate for home ownership, and I post about them on my Instagram, and I have been shocked about the response.
Because it's a dream. And it's the dream that we were sold, right? The dream that if you worked hard and you put your head down, like you were saying, if
Yeah.
we did everything we're supposed to, you will one day have your little piece of land or home or whatever. Whether you immigrated to this country for that or your parents or your ancestor did, this is the dream. So
Yeah.
it's crazy to me that people would think that tenant advocate doesn't see the whole picture.
Yeah. Looking like where, what? But I think also there's been this like melding of like landlords and homeowners. So people think that because
Right.
I speak about landlords, I'm including homeowners. I'm like, what are you like? Where are you guys getting this stuff from? So I was a tenants rights attorney for 12 years. And obviously I saw the gamut, and that influences a lot of my sentiment really about how housing policy runs. So a lot of times people do this whole like, oh, let's kumbaya. What do you hate landlords? I'm like, look, I don't have time to have these phony conversations about
Mhm.
can we like, no, let me tell you something. You're talking about kumbaya. Landlords in New York are trying to go to the Supreme Court, and I believe that they will be successful this time. They sued me. I was on the Rent Guidelines Board at the time, board member. That's the board that Mamdani has been talking about that will freeze the rent. So
Mhm.
when I was a board member, along with 9 other board members, landlords sued us, and their whole goal is to try to attack and weaken rent stabilization, and they want to get this before the Supreme Court. And the scary part of this is that when the Supreme Court looks at, let me just back up. Let me back up and say, sorry, before I even get there, what are they arguing? Okay. Their main argument is, hey, I'm a private landlord. I bought this building, this rent stabilized building. I own it. And I do not like this whole concept that the Rent Guidelines Board, and basically that's the city government, gets to tell me, put a cap on how much I can increase my rent by. I also don't like the concept that I have to renew my lease to a tenant because, see, in certain private market apartments, when the lease is done, it's up. The landlord,
It's done. Mhm.
I don't want to renew to you. But in rent stabilized apartments, the landlord has to have a cause to actually not renew the lease to you. So they're like, look, I want to be able to rent to who I want to rent to. I don't like the whole concept of rent stabilization. So you know what? This whole thing is a taking of my private property. That's literally their argument.
Mm.
So this is a constitutional issue. So we want to bring it before the Supreme Court. That's their argument in a nutshell. Now, they have different types of cases. There have been at least 5 of these cases in the last couple of years. And the problem is, for my fellow tenants and tenant advocates, the problem is that in a more recent one, Justice Clarence Thomas actually wrote a decision and said, hey, we're going to take up this case. We're not granting the take up this case, but we are very interested in this issue. And I'm going to give you some guidance on how to bring this case so that we can actually take this up, because this is a very fundamental issue for us to look at. That is scary.
I mean, say less. You said Clarence Thomas, and that was plenty.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, that is very scary. And the Supreme Court, when they think about taking up these issues, they look at whether something is a national issue. This has been in the press, especially because of the talk of a rent freeze.
Right.
So especially, it's not just New York. Boston has been weighing rent stabilization. California has had issues with it. So it is a nationwide issue.
First of all, I'm in awe of what you do and how you do it, because I do think that housing and just houselessness is such an issue that, like, it's a shame and a failure on our society that we have these issues to begin with. And affordability of even just renting is so hard right now. It's something, I forget the stat, you probably know better than I do, but it's like something like 60% of Americans, the majority, most Americans cannot afford to make ends meet right now. And that includes housing.
Yeah. And in New York City, nearly 70% of New Yorkers are tenants. I think for me, the affordability pops up because, as I said, I sit on the City Planning Commission.
Right.
And I remember when I first saw like one of the projects come through, and I was like, oh, and then I was like, hey, where's the affordable part? I remember this distinctly.
Because they had said there's like an affordability.
Yeah, there were like
part.
units, right? And then I was like, hey, where are the affordable housing units? They're like, that's them. And then when I looked, I was like, no, that can't be them, because those are $2,500 studios in Flatbush. So what are you talking about? And so this is, if you're in New York City, you go on Housing Connect, that's where all the affordable housing is listed, the housing lottery. You're going to see these apartments, and a lot of them, they're either very high income or very high rent, and that is the affordable housing. And so this is something that I have been raising. Now, where do we get this? This is part of what's called the area median income, and some of these numbers are by HUD. That is the Federal
Right.
Housing Agency, Housing and Urban Development. But it's New York's fault, because we can have what is called deeply affordable housing, which is to make this plain, right? There are different categories of affordable housing. You can have moderate income, you can have literally high income, because some of the affordable housing goes up to $165,000 for one person, right? Yeah. You can have extremely low income. The problem is that a lot of these projects are going by numbers that what I would consider is moderate income, right? 50,000 to me is still, that's not low income, right? And so
No, that's a teacher's salary.
right. And so you're starting at $50,000 and the majority of your units are $50,000 and up. That's not my clients that I represented at the nonprofits who were actually low income could not afford that.
Yeah.
So I think tying in rent stabilization into this, there's this whole argument of, oh, well, rent stabilization isn't means tested, meaning that anyone can live in rent stable. You don't have to have a specific income guideline. But my question is, if you're critiquing that, look at the actual means testing we have. That is based on that. A lot of that is, there's some politics behind that. This is my personal opinion, by the way. Everything I say, this is my personal opinion. There's some politics behind that, because as a developer, you make less money when you have your housing for extremely low income. If you can get away with
Right.
having affordable housing for moderate and higher income, then yeah, you're going to choose that, because you're going to generate more revenue through the rent with higher income. So
That's right.
some of this is allowing the interests of private developers and private parties to dictate our affordable housing, because here you in New York City or anywhere, there's this whole like, oh, public housing doesn't work. So let's let the private folks take over, right? And what that looks like is like, here, let them build. But then when they're building, there's a very like, all right, guys, we're so glad that you're coming to handle the housing crisis and you're coming to save the day. So you know what we're going to do as government? We're going to be hands off. If you've got any opposition, we're going to try to knock it out because we're so glad you're spending your money and we're chipping in. But we're just glad that you're spending your money to help us through. You're the hero. That's how this works. For anyone who doesn't know how the sauce is made.
It is so I'm so glad I'm hearing this from you, and it's not that I had no awareness of it, but it's hard to hear because just every sector, everything that should be for the public good is, like, corrupted by profit in this
Yeah.
case, because this is not being done based on what the actual needs of the community or the city really are, because there's so much more need than what we're providing, and what's making those decisions isn't our wise mind, isn't what the need, isn't what's gonna make us improve, it what someone else is willing to pay for and
Right.
profit off of.
Yeah.
It's perverse.
I know.
Like, it's literally perverted. Like, it shouldn't be that way. And so I can't wait to hear your solutions and thoughts about this because I really have no idea.
Yeah, and there's this whole, like, I don't think there needs to be a binary, like, "Oh, we should
Right.
have all public housing, we should have all private housing." But I do think we should be allowed to look critically at what works and what doesn't. And so for
Exactly.
me, let me give you an example, a real life example of how this plays out when I say developers dictate, right? We had a housing project in Harlem, and the community was very skeptical, very dubious. And they said, the community board was basically like, we're not going to approve this. We're against this because number one, it's a whole bunch of studios and one bedrooms. We're the 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms for families. Number two, the rent is there. It's too high. There are not enough actual affordable units. What is this like little chunk? Keep in mind, we have a system in New York City where the affordability, there's a mandatory inclusionary housing. That means that 25 to 30% of these housing developments will include affordable housing. Now that's a reasonable number. It could be higher, but the point is that the problem is even out of that 25 to 30%, a
Mhm.
lot of those are moderate income housing. So communities get mad because they're like,
Yeah.
you're trying to build a 2,000 unit complex in Harlem or whatever. And then only 25% of these are going to be affordable. And of those affordable units, they're mostly for moderate income. This is city funded gentrification. What are you guys doing? So these are very valid concerns.
Yeah.
Well, here's how this plays out on the ground. City council member got involved and was sticking up, but here's how this plays out. You get branded as not a team player because you don't want to work with the developer. How dare you not? How dare you bring up questions? Because again, this is the developer's money and we should be so happy that developers are, I'm so serious. This is the real deal. Tanya's laughing for you.
Sorry, I was laughing because we should be happy. That's literally how they treat us. Like, you should be
How it
happy.
goes. And this is why I'm here to provide how the sauce is made. And yes, yes, developers are doing. I'm not saying that developers are the devil, right? But what I'm saying is when it's time to bring up very valid concerns, like, for example, the mayor has a management report that they release every year. It shows how many of these completed units actually went for extremely low income. Only 15% the
Wow.
affordable housing went for extremely low income. So that means the people I represented, all of this, like, oh, we want to prevent homelessness. You're not going to prevent homelessness by housing moderate income. And this isn't to say that there shouldn't be affordable housing for moderate income. But the point is, if you're going to call something low housing, make it actually be for low income housing.
Exactly. And what do you what's the cutoff for low income? What
So
is the number that they
let me
use?
check. I'm going to
Sorry,
actually check.
I should not have just asked you a random ass question. Like,
I'm fairly certain it's $80,000. I know, but I actually think it might be 90. So I'm gonna check right. It's $90,000. Let me just confirm that what is considered low income in terms of affordable housing for one person in New York City, according to the rubric, goes up to $90,000.
because we know that so many people are making so much less and forced to
Yeah.
survive. And I say that because I was one of those people, right? Like, as a
Yeah.
teacher, I made much less and I lived with roommates for a reason. I had roommates for many years while I was a teacher. growing up in the city, and obviously it's a different time, so, like, you can't compare dollar amount to dollar amount, but when I went to college, my mother was making 15K a year, and I get it, like,
Ye
I grew up on that side of the spectrum, which is an extreme, but that's why we need to talk about it,
Yeah,
because I think the reality is that 90K in New York City is nothing in many ways. Like, it's really
right,
hard to make ends
right,
meet just as a single person, but if you
right.
are a family of 4 surviving on 90K, like, and I know that's not how the rubric grows, like, they change it with the number, but the affordability of New York City is just non-existent, right? Groceries, rent, all those things, so it's wild that 90K is low incomes. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think and yeah, the fact of the matter is that 90K in New York City does not travel as far as, like, 90K in other parts of the US.
Yeah.
That being said, like you said, there are a lot of people if there's working class in New York City. There's Uber drivers, home health aides, like, oftentimes these people are making an hourly wage, and they are making $20,000, $30,000 and below.
Right. Right. Ugh. So what do those
Like,
people
let
do?
oh, yeah, and I'm glad you asked because I was gonna then I think someone listening to this, "Well, why don't they apply for public housing?" Yeah, the wait list for NYCHA is, like, 10 years.
I was gonna say, is it
There
10 years? Because it's always been 10 years anytime I've heard of it.
Yeah, well, it's still 10 years, and you
Is
can
it?
expedite it if you meet one of the criterion, and that one of those is, like, for example, if you're a DV victim or other types of criteria, but that would just lessen it to 4 years, right?
Mm,
But, yeah, the wait list for public housing is long, and this is where we get into other types of housing policy discussion where because there's such a demand for affordable housing, there's been this really interesting and quite frankly, kind of controversial conversation about how long people should be able to have affordable housing. So, for example, for public housing, people are like, you know what, there's a whole conversation about how there should be no succession because, yeah, they're like, you should, and
I'm sorry, I
succession,
made a face because that's crazy to me.
yeah, succession for folks who don't know is where, let's say I live in an apartment right now, and then I pass it on to my daughter, who, if I want to leave, and then my daughter is able to succeed. Now, there is such a thing as rent stabilized succession, where it happens quite often. And there's also succession in public housing. And so, because of the dire need for affordable housing, this other conversation is ramped up about whether we actually should have succession. And I think I just want folks to really fully understand. Let me just challenge these folks a bit. Where would they go, right? Because I think there is this very American concept, right? That, oh, you live in affordable housing. So because you live there and your rent is lower, then you should use that time and build a multi-million-dollar business, get rich, and then move out. I swear to God, this is literally
That
how
is what they think. What
you're
they
like,
think.
"Oh, yeah, you should live there, and then why don't you use the time that you live there? Build yourself up." And they go, "Do you understand how many people if you go on LinkedIn?" I wanna just tell these people, do you even understand if you go on LinkedIn right now and you scroll the feed for 5 minutes or more, you are going to come across someone who says, "I've been unemployed for 6 months. I'm desperately looking for work," or "I just got laid off," or it's a like, what are you guys talking about? You guys don't
Right.
live in the real world. What are you talking about? There is no, "Oh, I lived here, and then because I'm able to, like" it might happen for some people, but this is the mindset, I think, for a lot of anything that is income restricted.
Yeah, and I know this is gonna be mad meta, and it's the hippie in me, but the fact that we believe as a people, and this is the American way, that you have to earn your living is at the root of this.
Yeah.
There's this belief that if you are alive and taking up, God forbid, the amount of room you take up of space on this earth, you need to pay for that.
Yeah.
Do the squirrels pay rent? It'd be like like, if you are alive if you are alive, what don't I have an inalienable right to life? What's it mean if not that, like, we don't have to earn that right to life? And I get it, like, I know that this country is so scared of the welfare state, But having housed people who are safe and who can actually contribute because they are safe and housed is actually how we create a better economy, more innovation, better things for ourselves. And it's terrifying because I feel like that scarcity mindset of like, well, if you want something, you better earn it, you better pay for it, or else too bad for you, is why we're exactly where we are right now.
And let's just tease that out more. I often look at how other countries are handling like
Mhm.
urban planning, for example. So like Japan, like there's so many different countries that I've looked at in Asia where I'm like, wow, like their public facilities are just amazing. You go to a gas
Yeah.
station, it's like a robot. They're literally like refilling your gas for you. It's like amazing. I'm like, so I think like, why can't we have that here in America? Or it's something as simple as like say private I'm sorry, not private, public restrooms, right? Why can't we
Right.
have nice public restrooms? And I want us to really sit and reflect on why. And I want us to think about right now, I'm going to ask the audience, what would the government building beautiful public restrooms? You know
Cue
why?
Jeopardy theme music in between her answer
Cute.
and this.
You know why? Because people will say, people will the American way is people will conjure up who deserves to have access to that and who doesn't. They'll conjure up, they're like, someone's gonna tear it down because we shouldn't have it for free because and I want you to think about when I say about public restrooms and you think, oh well, this person's gonna tear it down and it's gonna be a waste of government money. Well, guess what? People also think that way about housing.
Yeah.
People also think that way about housing. If I show you a picture of beautiful, affordable housing, people will literally say, "Oh, it's nicer than mine." And I think that's a way to say, I don't think affordable housing should be nice looking. I think that it should be a form of punishment if people
You
are
should
poor.
suffer. You should
You should
suffer.
suffer so that you get up out of there after 5 years. I want us to challenge. This is literally, like, when we dig deep, this is how a lot of people think. And I
Yeah.
know this because I've been doing this work for so long. I talk to throngs of people. This is at the heart of how people think. And unfortunately, it can be the bedrock of housing policy.
And I'm sure it is, right? Because the very people who have suffered and have lived the true consequences of those policies are not usually the people at the table who get to make the decisions, which is why the fact that you are there and that I am here changes the game a bit. Because we get to talk about the reality of it, and it makes people uncomfortable and people don't like it, but it's true, and you're talking about that with restrooms and housing. People feel that way about internet, Leah, internet. Like, I've witnessed it here. So the city bar, the association side, and the policy department, and a bunch of committees have been doing tremendous, and CBJC as well, let me give all the flowers to all the people, have been doing tremendous work around getting free Wi-Fi and internet services for the houseless and shelters. We get letters from members being like, they should get a job if they want internet.
Wow. Oh,
How do you get a job without internet?
wow. Yeah.
But that's
No,
the
this
reality.
and I want us to think. So when I talk about how affordable housing is right now and how it's really like for moderate income, I want to just also do another bombshell. It's because
Get
a
'em.
lot of the public wants it that way. They don't mind it.
It's
For them
true.
by it's they don't mind it. They don't mind it because they will say, "Oh, what about the teachers? What about the firefighters? What about the people who?" Well, like, okay, you can have affordable housing to them, but if you're gonna call something low income like if you actually want to prevent homelessness, you need to provide housing to the lowest income because they are the ones most likely to be homeless out of everyone. So
Absolutely.
what are we doing here? But you have a lot of, oh, I went to my local supermarket and even some people in my family have said this nonsense. And we are not by any stretch of the imagination rich. So I want people who are listening to this to think I'm not even just talking about like someone who's wealthy. No, there are a lot of people who do not have a lot of privilege, and they are the main ones spewing classism. See, I've heard, oh, I went to my corner grocery store and I saw someone pull out their EBT card to buy lobster, and I don't think they should be doing it.
Oh, I can't stand those
Like,
arguments.
it's just like, But, you have this kind of like the reason why you are low income is because of your personal individual failures. And it has
Mhm.
nothing with the fact that there is a lack of affordable housing, that there is structural barriers, that there is discrimination, that it's harder for you to get a job as a Black person, Latino person, Asian person. Like these are the conversations that unfortunately now when you say it, people are like, oh, you're going woke. And it's like, this is a reality. Talking about
Yeah.
what is a little reality?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right that it's across the racial spectrum, the class spectrum. You can internalize this nonsense even if you are a victim of it. In fact, you're probably more likely to because it gives you an opportunity to explain your situation. Even if it's not working out in your best interest. It's a way that we make sense of the world, right? And listen, I'm not perfect, no one is. I've had views in my life that when I look at now, I was like, "Oh, wow, I really was spouting out their rhetoric." Even though I was affected by I lived the projects until I went to college, and then I lived in the projects again when I was in law school. And let me tell you, both times it was just so clear to me how this system, which listen, I'm so thankful for. I never lived on the streets, and I know so many who have in my family, friend groups. I've known a lot of people who've been houseless, and I never, thank God I had those projects. As much as I hate them, I love them too, right? Because at least I was never in the streets. It was just so clear to me how this system would never actually allow these people, my people, to be able to better their opportunities in housing. It what they
Yeah.
were even though we were paying so little rent, the rent we were paying was somewhat proportional to what we could give, but honestly, it wasn't. It was still more than what we could give. But there was no savings. There was no savings in my family. How do you expect people to pull themselves up? It's so much more than housing. It's interconnected with all the social services. So, in looking at what we're looking at, Leah, right now, and with the state of the world, what is the way forward here? Like, if there's something you could leave our listeners with, what we can do as individuals, as a profession, how can we support you in what you're doing? Like, what is the way forward?
Okay. So number one, stick up for tenants' rights. Tenants'
Yes.
rights are not antithetical to whatever you've got going on. And I say that because, believe it or not, there are a lot of first generation or people of color, working class, where because of that class background and race background and those barriers, they are taught that, like, you can finish the sentence, the best way to build wealth
Buying?
is
No,
real
I don't
estate.
know.
They'll
Yeah,
say, "Oh,
buying a house.
and what yeah, and they'll say and they'll also say
Yep.
specifically by being a landlord, by getting so the landlordism is when I talk about tenants' rights, I get a lot of people of color who are just kind of really hesitant, number 1, because they're like, "Hold on, I've been taught you're talking about something that is kind of my dream or my backup because 'cause I've been taught that, like, this'll be my side hustle at some point
Yep.
to in order to move into, like, upper middle class." So that's number
So
1.
true.
And then there's number 2, which is the respectability portion of, like, why are you advocating for tenants' rights? Why don't you advocate for homeowner rights? Why don't you talk to them? And like I said, first of all, it's not a moral failing to be a tenant.
Correct.
And everyone doesn't want to be a homeowner. And there is anytime you bring up any kind of issue, and it's the same thing with people on a job. If someone's like, oh, I don't know, my boss just slapped me, people be like, why are you still working there? Why don't you go form your own company? That's another. I think this is just like, I don't know if it's a uniquely American thing, but it's very just like you can't advocate for anything to be better. You just have to go leave and form your own entity and business. Whether it's your own housing, if you're like, "Hey, I have more." Well, go build your own housing then. Why don't you go buy a house, right? You're on a job and you say, "Oh, well, go form your own company," right? And I just want us to move away from that. So, the
Yeah.
answer to first answer your question is stick up for tenants' rights and just when you are talking to other people, the second is I want us to reframe how we're having the conversation.
Mhm.
Not a moral failing to be a tenant. it is imperative that we advocate for deeply affordable housing, meaning affordable housing for extremely low income. And it's okay. There are a lot of people who are very uneasy about that. They're
Mhm.
very uneasy about that, very uneasy about advocating for that. So that's why I say it's imperative, because you can't say you don't want to see any homeless people in your neighborhood, but then you're against housing for extremely low income.
Exactly.
Like, what's going on? Right. And so you want to be able to stick up for the things. If you want the community, if you want us to truly have the community that we want, well, that's a big part of it.
It means safety for everyone, right? If our most vulnerable people are safe, they're less likely to turn to crime or any of the other things you might be fearful of, right? If we have more people who don't have means to take care of themselves, what do we expect the world to be? Desperate people do desperate things. And
Yeah.
it's not their fault, right? I'm a millennial who speaks in memes, but like I saw someone say something the other day and I was like, I've never heard it articulated so well. And it's just like, I can't judge your choices if I didn't know your options, if I don't know your options.
Mhm.
You
Right.
know what I'm saying? And it's so true. And if we really want a safer place for us all, it needs to start with the people who need the safety most. And
Yeah.
you don't have safety if you don't have a roof over your head.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Thank you, Leah, for all the work you're doing. Like, honestly, it is such a pleasure to see you and watch you work, girl. It is so great.
You. And same here. Thank you for being you and being a powerhouse at the city bar and in
Oh
New
my God.
York.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh, girl, you have to come back. We have to do this again. The next time there's a housing update or any update, the people
Yeah.
want to know what you
Yeah.
have to say.
Yeah. So then next time I can come back and talk all about housing or professionalism as a racial construct. It's been I can't believe it's been 3 years, but yeah.
Well, you are always invited. And anytime you want to come back, you just say the word and we're
Thank
here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Building Belonging. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen and Dana Ray Tovar.